Last season's Hige no Soru ruffled the feathers of many while being defended by others for mostly the wrong reasons, thoroughly, albeit with less staying power, cementing itself into the pantheon of controversial age gap and supposedly pedophilia-baiting anime that near ever closer to being regular talking points for this community. As I've spoken on many of these topics at length in relation to a much more divisive, with far better surface-level reasoning, show before, I'll be refraining from repeating myself too much. You can read that essay on Mal as something of an accompaniment to this one, if a balanced discussion on these such topics interests you, on culture shock and imposing the standards of the West. Now, without any further ramblings, let's embark into the spoiler-free segment. Music and animation. These two categories represent both the very best and worst of Hirou. On the side of music, we really have a solid score. It leans heavily on the use of string instruments, in particular the guitar, in a way that gives the whole OST a homely, comfortable feel, which is obviously rather fitting. Furthermore, it has a number of well-produced, more emotionally resonant songs, so that the large number of dialogue-heavy scenes don't all sound the same, with the more prevalent inclusion of the piano and the violin for the sadder tracks, which quite nicely contrast the guitar of the upbeat ones. Finally, the more tense music for scenes where characters are worried and so on, while weaker than the rest, certainly fulfills their roles to an above-average degree. All in all, it's a great showing in the OST department, and an OST I like listening to quite a lot. The animation, on the other hand, lags behind the rest of the show. It's not an issue with the direction, which is generally pretty strong, along with a great sense of lighting and a fitting art style, but rather that the actual movement of the characters is fairly poor. At times it can seem rigid, and for the most part the visuals are often stationary aside from the mouth movements. Nothing unusual for this genre, but noteworthy all the same. This most comes into play when the characters attempt to express emotions. Some of these scenes operate better than others, but oftentimes characters will almost look like they've been superimposed onto the background when they try to interact with it, or their facial animations simply won't keep up with the voice actors, leading to a far too frequent portrayal of the dialogue being more melancholy or sadder than the emotions being displayed. Overall, the direction is strong, which makes up for a lot of this, but if the property didn't have a good sense of pacing and so on, then the animation could easily be seen as below average. Story and characters. We'll leave any discussion of the more controversial elements till post the spoiler tag, but for now it should suffice to say that if you're worried about this being a show that in some way endorses pedophilia, then worry no further. The same applies to the false and somewhat sarcastic claims of grooming. Hirou is simply put a slice-of-life anime with a secondary focus on romance. Its main query is the display of the daily lives of the lead characters, whom, through unusual circumstances, become codependent on one another, and find a sort of kinship that allows them to be more fulfilled in life via each other's company. It goes a fair bit deeper than that, mind you, with their backstories receiving time to naturally arise and then settle, before being dealt with in a relatively mature manner. As already mentioned, the pacing is strong, slow enough to make you believe in a relationship dynamic of each character, but never drags. Something of importance is usually right around the corner. The story's messages and themes are all handled well with what I would call a degree of personal sincerity on the part of the author, and I think it actually all sets out to do a commendably... I think it achieves all it sets out to do commendably well in its short 12-episode run. The characters are fairly simple for the most part, which is in no way an issue. This isn't the sort of tale that requires a full supporting cast of well-fleshed-out individuals. Rather, instead, the anime makes the wise choice to give us more than enough from the side characters to make them believable and compelling, but never so much so that the focus is taken away from Sayu and Yoshida. This is a solid decision, considering the story is driven by these two, and to deviate from that would only be to mismanage the limited time space. So while I understand those disappointed not to see the adaptations of the story's B-cast development arcs, I think the choice to be concise and effective was definitely the right one. The characters are therefore more than serviceable, and certainly enjoyable to spend time with. Spoiler-free conclusion. Despite the often misplaced or narrow-minded whining and intolerance of Twitter mobs and malforms against this show, Hige actively pursues its goals in an effective and engaging manner. It sets out its stock from the very beginning and delivers on pretty much everything satisfactorily, even if those deliveries weren't what people necessarily wanted, for better or worse. The animation, while sometimes weak, by no means gets worse as the show progresses, and the OST is consistently well-suited to any occasion. If you enjoy a short, slow burn with good pacing, mature discussions, and a heartfelt message for youths and adults alike, then you should hopefully enjoy Hirou. However, if you find it boring or feel urged to sling derogatory rhetoric at it, then it may simply not be for you. I give it a score of 8.5. Spoilers ahoy. On debate and the merits, or lack thereof, of intolerance. I don't intend for this to be one of my longer reviews. As aforementioned, I've written on much of this in my other essays, but maybe it bears me mentioning that intolerance gets you nowhere. Not wanting to understand and engage with the media you watch is fine if you're busy or tired or just watching for light relief. Those are all great reasons to enjoy anime, but to have the available processing power and free space to go out and complain that such and such is like this, to ride upon your white horse of justice, to call a creator pedophilic for writing a doujinshi, to write off a show or person for including liking ecchi content, to attempt to cancel someone's entire career and presumably their livelihood, is all ultimately to be intolerant. If you have that time on your hands, then be constructive. Attempt to understand the media you consume or the people you lambast. Not everyone is out there to get you in your creed. While it oversteps the line in places, Dragon Maid's Lolitas are clearly meant for comedy and found family purposes. ReZero is an active critique of the power fantasy genre, not a member of it. And School Days is brilliant. I really do mean that. The point I'm trying to get across there is if you label a group you perceive to be corrupt as evil or immoral, then how are you any different? Violence only begets more violence, and the same applies in debate. If you refuse to interact with someone, try to force your will on them. If you're a college student who labels all right-wing speakers Nazis, someone who tells anti-vaxxers or flat earthers to go die, then you yourself are only antagonizing them, only making them more hardline. If anything, you're proving them right. Their mad conspiracy theories hold far more sway if you use their own insane debating tactics against them. You yourself become part of the problem. If you're in the right, then you almost never have the right to be equally intolerant. An eye for an eye, and we all go blind. What I'm trying to get at here is, even if 90% of those people can never be convinced back to their sensibilities, there's never a good reason to give up and push the 10% who will still talk amicably, the civil ones who just lost their way along the way. Is Hirou intended as grooming? Clearly, without question, no. It's actually a pretty simple story, but the fact that two people falling in love upsets so many is baffling. It's not that I'm saying an age gap is okay, but rather that love is okay. Great lengths are taken to show that Yoshida isn't a pedophile, nor does the show or author endorse their actions. Even if it's 100% easy to say they end up together at the end, it's actually left quite intentionally vague as to whether they go any further than living with one another, and painstakingly clear that they are now both of age. How can Yoshida groom a person he didn't know? Are we suggesting he was waiting for a girl to appear and offer herself to him? Or what, that his efforts to make sure she got home happily and learned to value herself and her body more was somehow an elaborate ruse to win her over? Why would he even do that when she offered himself to him while he was plastered drunk in their very first encounter? It's just absurd, put lightly. Now, to be fair, if we entertain the idea that people believe there could be a tenuous link between this and inspiring real-life adults, then yes, there may be a discussion that needs to be had there. But to me, the discussion should be about improving society to the point where people aren't that mind-dumbingly easy to influence. To censor media as exceedingly tame as this is indicative of a world where doing so would simply be to put a band-aid on a burst dam. It's ridiculous and unreasonable, put lightly. Shall we ban all murder mysteries lest they encourage or inspire homicide? Isekais certainly need to go if they're going to actively encourage the act of jumping out in front of truck goons in order to attain paradise. Again, I go into further detail in my other essay, but even then, Higehiro is so tame and clearly has such pure intentions that I'm not even sure if the discussion is even feasibly comparable for all but the most arbitrary of connections. The struggles of youth or living for the sake of living. Moving back to the actual show rather than the politics and bureaucratic grandstanding, for our last talking point, let's return to what the story is actually about. Its core themes across the entire cast is simply growing up. We often look to older media for insight on our current predicaments. For example, I myself briefly touched on how Nausicaa Valley of the Wind talks about climate changes long before its mainstream relevance, in ways that are still poignant to this day. But in Hirohiro's case, we're presented with the common flaws all of us share from a modern perspective. It's not unique, nor do all anime need to strive for this, but it certainly is well put. Sayu is struggling with an infinitely more complicated world than is suited to sentient creatures, one so complicated that you can lose a friend to mental illness for what seems like, from your perspective, to be incomprehensible reasons. Where you can be surrounded by adults who seemingly are apathetic, simply because they are just trying their best to cope as well. A world that's so unfair we all, and I think I really do mean all, sometimes want to run away no matter the consequences. No, she isn't rational. Why this surprises anyone I can't fathom. She's a teenage girl. It would be far more unrealistic if she did act logically. Her story is about growing up, learning to value her own body, and coming to understand one another. It's so brilliant that her mother is portrayed as wholly incapable of understanding Sayu, because that's real life. I know more people like that than is preferable. They aren't malicious or evil, they just see things in a different light, cope in a different way. But that can make them hard to deal with, can make them act cruel and harshly selfish, as is the case here. Meanwhile, Yoshida is going through the same experience but as a young adult. He doesn't take care of himself enough, which is something even the title of the show reinforces. After being rejected, I shaved. He lives to work rather than working to live, a feeling many of us know all too well. We're subtly informed that he's a heavy drinker, frequent smoker, and always accepts business trips. He lives in a crappy, messy apartment and eats almost solely fast food. Well, on the surface he may seem like the usual calm and collected, has all the answers self-insert character. In reality, he's a mess who's struggling just as much as Sayu is with the whole process of growing up. Except where she is a girl, he's a man. Where would he run to? Who would pay his taxes? What would his colleagues think? This is what I meant when I said above in the spoiler-free segment that this is a deeply personal story. It's clear a lot of the author's own experience with the world must have gone into this, and I find it hard to believe most people don't empathise with or even see themselves in at least one of these characters' struggles. Once you stop bitching all the time, you might just find this, of all things, is an anime that attempts to try talking directly to you in particular. You just aren't listening, and that's a sad reality in my view. Then where does that lead? The people of Hirou aren't bad, just human. The store clerk who forces himself on Sayu should objectively be evil or morally reprehensible, but then he helps her with her brother. That could have been handled a little more nuancedly, but it does get the thematic point across quite effectively, if clumsily. Is he good or bad? In the end, Yoshida has to step up, not Sayu's brother. So is the brother good or bad? The mother clearly can't handle the situation around her. Rich or not, she was abandoned with a baby by her husband and is greatly prideful in her personal image. There's clearly no positive outcome with her, only a compromise. So is she good or bad? In this harsh world where everyone's just trying to cope in their own, often very corrupt ways, why wouldn't those two confused souls end up intermingled? How could Yoshida not fall for the girl that he both needs and who wants him? The girl who gives him a reason to work, to turn down the business trips, to come home on time, helps him eat better, makes his apartment a home rather than a box. The girl who gives him a reason to, well, shave. Conversely, Sayu is presented with someone genuinely kind after literally months of misery, self-loathing, losing her best friend, her family, and her own body. Despite how utterly broken Yoshida clearly is to anyone with a pair of working eyes and functional brain cells, he takes her in, cares for her, helps her realise the value of herself, smooths things over as best as possible with her family for her, gives her a place to return to, makes it okay to cry, okay to hate her friend for dying, okay to hate herself for not being able to save her. The man who was kind to her simply because she was cute and he was drunk. Age didn't matter when they met basked in the moonlight under a lamppost. He just acted out of kindness. We should all hold. That's all. Closing thoughts. Hirou was my seasonal anime for last month. It's a late review, I know. I wasn't sure I was going to speak on this as it's such familiar ground, but really, I do like this one. I don't always pick one up. Rather like I did with 86, I wait till the end of the season and then pick and choose what I like the looks of. Because somewhat tangentially related, I find watching anime seasonally to be something too close to a regimented experience, where your immediate reactions take over your whole viewpoint, where popular opinion sways your time with a piece. I watch anime to enjoy and understand it as either entertainment or works of artistry. Why would I want to let it or a mainstream company's whims choose when I can and how much I can watch of something? In Hige, I partially kept up with it due to its relevance to a few pieces I'd been writing, and I'm glad I did, as I doubt without the controversy I'd have ever picked up this one. Every cloud is a silver lining, I guess. As a story, while it could sometimes be tighter or more in-depth, it seldom if ever felt like it copped out. I felt I got every interaction I wanted in a fresh and mature fashion, all with a style and production that felt honest. I don't think Hige is a game-changing or even that memorable in the long run, nor do I think it surpasses its contemporaries, but I also don't think it wants to, and that's okay. It feels almost unique in that it doesn't really belong to any one genre. It isn't quite a pure romance or rom-com, nor is it a true slice of life or drama. It's something different, more akin to an open letter to the youth of the world, to everyone's shared experience of struggle with the human condition, and I think that's quite special. Art is an expression of oneself, and while not all aspects of this show are outstanding, I feel I can say with certainty that I thoroughly enjoyed coming along for the ride, and that was this artistic pursuit and production of teens expressive of adolescence and growing up in modern society, and for that alone I think the show is surprisingly great of a success. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, please press the like button, and thanks for listening.